today we're talking about CSA strategies. We're talking about sales strategies, production strategies, distribution, and site and location strategies. And then we'll have time for questions. Next slide. The reminders, like remain on mute unless you're asking a question, use the chat over there. I think we've covered that. So we are Farm Generations. We're a multi-stakeholder cooperative. We've always been a farmer. We've been since the beginning a farmer cooperative. So the farmers who use Grown By, which is our sales platform, the platform that the cooperative has developed, have been invited to join. Now employees can also join to be member owners. And the goal of that was to really make sure that the decision-making power around the platform and the choices that are made about the platform are really in the hands of the farmers who are using it. So that's a basics about who Farm Generations is. You'll hear us say Farm Generations here, but you'll also hear Grown By, which is the platform. Thank you, Danny. Next slide. All right, and then so this project, so part of the thing about us being a cooperative, right, is that we had seen other platforms make choices that were maybe not in the best interest of the farmers who use them, or who didn't feel like that to the farmers, or platforms that just went under. And sometimes that's because they were venture capital funded, and the venture capital funders came asking for a return. And that has not been our funding strategy to get Grown By off the ground. We have used a lot of USDA grants, which is helpful, and they don't ever come to ask for that money back. And so this project itself is a USDA Farmers Market Promotion Program grant, and it had a number of different pieces. It was a grant between 2022 and 2023. One piece was that we did workshops for farmers on CSA best practices. A lot of that information is going to be kind of similar to some of the information we talked about today. We wrote a corresponding handbook or workbook for farmers. Right there, you see that. And that information is pretty directly related to what we're talking about today, but we'll dive in a little bit deeper. And then we did a comprehensive survey report of core groups and CSAs in New York City. This project was really about this innovative New York City model with core groups. And so we were looking at that model and how, what does it look like now? What are the strengths and the weaknesses? How can we adapt that model in other places? And so there's a survey report that one can also read. And then understanding that model, we created some features and updates on Grown By that could help support all kinds of farms, but specifically farmers who are using this New York City model. Today's workshop's not really New York City specific, but if you look at the workbook, and I highly encourage you to do so, you'll see that there's some stuff that's kind of New York City specific in it. That CSA workbook, that white one that says CSA on the side, you do have to enter your email address to access it. It's free. It's like kind of long, like maybe 75 or 80 pages, but is full of really useful information. And so I encourage you to check that out. All right, next slide. All right, so today we're doing the some basic planning around CSA. We're doing some sort of pre-CSA planning. I think that understanding all of these strategies and models can be helpful if you are 10 years into running a CSA, and there might be ways you want to tweak it or change it or consider bringing in new thoughts or ideas or strategies, which we'll talk about. But also it can be really, really, really useful in those first years where you're like, we want to do this. We've heard a lot about this, but how do we actually get this off the ground? So thinking a little bit about how your CSA will work, part of that is understanding what's common in your area. Not because you have to do what your neighbors are doing or have to not do what your neighbors are doing, but because if you're using terminology that is similar to what other people are using, that is important in gaining customers, right? So some of it's just about making sure that you're able to help your customers understand what you're offering really clearly, and using terms that are helpful. Then there's a lot of this that's about what you need as a farmer. So you're thinking about your production expertise. Traditional CSA requires a certain amount of really production capacity and skills to make sure you're delivering a really consistent share every week, and the land to support that kind of growing. There's definitely tech tools. So some more traditional methods of CSA are going to be a little lighter on tech potentially. And the more complicated your shares get, the more you may want to be using tools to make that easier. And then depending the types of CSAs you choose, that's going to impact your labor needs, both in growing and harvesting, and also in like packaging, site managing, that kind of thing. So these are all things to kind of keep in mind about like what's important for you and your operation as you make choices about what kind of CSA to build. And then there's just an idea of setting up systems that are going to scale with you. So you may have an end picture of the size or the scale you want to be as a farmer, and trying to make a CSA platform, a CSA system that's going to work with you, not just right now and next season, but also, 8 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line. Next slide. All right, so this has a lot of words on it. These are taken from the guidebook, but I'm going to dive into these just a little bit. I'm going to dive into them a lot. That's a lie. A little bit is a lie. We're going to talk about them considerably. So the first sales strategy I would say is sort of the best place to start is to think about traditional CSAs. And so when I say traditional, right, I'm talking about a model that kind of developed especially in the Northeast in the late, like especially around the late 90s, and that was based maybe on lots of other ideas that had been percolating around the world. But in this more traditional model, members pay at the beginning of the season, or even in installments, perhaps prior to the beginning of the season, and they get a share of what is harvested each week. So this share is set. The perks of this are that the farmer knows exactly what they need to harvest, like every week of the season, or what they are going to need to have. They can really pre-plan for growing effectively. And additional, like one of the other big perks is that they have that financial input at the beginning of the season when they need to be buying seeds and soil and potting mix and amendments, that kind of stuff. It's also like a really committed relationship where the farm knows exactly who's buying from them, and they can really plan for that over the year. The members share in the bounty and the risk of the farm, and that's an important part of that traditional CSA, right? You might have weeks where things are super bountiful and you're struggling as a farmer to not give your members too much, right? And then there are other weeks where things might be a little bit lighter, especially earlier in the season, and that the customer kind of understands that that's going to be part of this sort of CSA arrangement. Also, in this model of CSA, it's common to have membership agreements, and that might be a thing you want to include no matter what kind of CSA you tend to run, to just drive home that point that like you're committing to this for a season-long share. So that is an overview of traditional CSA, and probably, depending where you are, is the kind of CSA you think of when you think of CSA. You're already here, so you probably have some understanding about CSA. And we'll be talking today, like, I was a CSA grower. I've worked for other CSA farms. When I say that, I often think of produce, right? Specifically of vegetables. So having I often think of it as a share being like a collection of vegetables that like kind of makes up what is available that week. But there are lots of other things that farms use like this more traditional model for. So you could be using a sort of traditional CSA setup for meat, for dairy, for medicinal herbs, for all of that. So anyway, that's just like a point to think about. But often when we think of a base share, we think of a vegetable share. And then there is there are kind of two other ideas that come up. One is this spend down CSA shown here in the center, or sometimes called a farm credit CSA. And that is really sort of stretching the idea of CSA a little bit. And in this model, a customer would buy credit from the farm, say in the amount of like maybe $600 worth of farm credit. And then each week through the harvest season, the customer would sort of select items a la carte from the farm for their order. So they would just be buying what they want, what they are excited to eat, and that would mean that the farm isn't committed to like having a full share that is exactly the same for all of their members. Sometimes in that farm credit or spend down CSA, a farm will offer a little bit of extra perk, right? So if a customer spends $600, the farm will say that's worth like $630 worth of like sales. That you get extra credit. And this is also a really nice model to like dip your toe in a little bit of commitment or like sort of membershipness if you are a market farmer, because you could be offering that at a farm stand or a farmer's market stall where you have all your stuff already out for sale, but you have these people who have committed to buying from you. They've paid you a little bit up, they've paid you this chunk of money up front so that you have some of the like upfront seasonal perks of CSA, being able to have the money when you need it to spend on seeds and soil and amendments and whatnot. And it's like kind of great as a customer to feel like, oh, I don't have to figure out what to do with these salad turnips this week. I can just buy the food I know my family's going to eat. I can not feel like I'm wasting it, that kind of thing. So that's another model. I think we're just calling all of these things CSA because I also think it's nice to kind of lump them all together and be able to present them in a webinar like this. We could have long philosophical conversations about whether that is a phrase that should be used to mention this, talk about this spend down model or not, but we're not having that now. The other idea is this customizable boxed CSA. So this is a model in which the farm has like a share that's planned for the week. Like these are the 8 items that are in our share, but customers can use the farm software or sales platform to swap out items that they might not want. So it's a little bit of a blend of the two. So that's one. And then over here on the side are 2 other kinds of sales strategies. So one would be rolling shares, where like a farm might have a 12-week share and you could join at any time, and then at the end of that 12 weeks you would get like re-enrolled. That can be a way that some farms manage inventory a little bit. So they might say, like, especially with something like eggs, which is an example we see frequently for these rolling shares, they don't want to maybe have somebody commit to a full 52 weeks of eggs, because what if most of their chickens get killed by a fox or something? But they're able to kind of sell in these big chunks. And the other thing that I put here as a sales strategy, but I think is like maybe even more than a sales strategy, is thinking about sliding scales or tiers of cost of the share. So we have a whole webinar about making shares financially accessible on October 16th, but sliding scales or tiers are one way of doing that. So in this system of sliding scales or tiers, you would have one base share price. So say it probably costs me about $700 to grow the share that I am growing. And then you may have some shares that are available. So that would be your mid-level perhaps. And you might have some shares that are available at a more expensive level that are for higher income families, and some shares that are available at a lower income level for other families that for which this wouldn't really be a possibility at the $700 mark. And that is great because it allows people to sort of self-select their income levels. And it's also a great way as a farmer to like encourage yourself to make sure that you're selling you could say like, oh, I have 15 lower income shares, and I'm going to work really hard to make sure I find folks who fit into that category, to make sure that I have a diverse membership in my farm. And there's information in the handbook a little bit more about that. And like I said, we have this other webinar all about financial accessibility, including around SNAP. So I think that covers it. Before we move on, do you have any questions? Does anybody have any questions about those, or have anything that you're like, this seems like a sales strategy, but Kara didn't name it? You can come off of mute, or you can put it in the in-call messages chat if you are shyer. All right. Danny, next slide. And then we have production strategies. So one production strategy, which is not on here, is just like grow food. It's like very straightforward and sort of simple, and it might be the default, right? To just like do what you know how to do as a farmer. There are some other ideas about different kinds of production that could be selling points for your CSA, or could be things that you want to consider. And these are also interesting to consider adding on in future years as you scale up and feel like you're, I don't know if there's ever a point as a farmer where you're like, wow, this is just rolling right along. How to make things more complicated. But, some of these are things you could adopt later. Adapt, implement later. So the first one, which is a little harder to implement later, is a multi-farm partnership. So this is something that comes up that we hear of a lot, because I think sometimes these farms are very interested in us at Grown By and Farm Generations Cooperative as a cooperative. But in this sort of multi-farm partnership, 2 or more farms might grow together to create a full CSA share. They may share administrative duties. They might divide crops, maybe by region or soil type, or what's easier or better for them. It also just means that there's a lot of specialized equipment that you have to be growing certain crops at scale. And so maybe you don't want to have a potato digger or a potato planter, and you just want, like, some other farm in your area can do that, and you guys come together to market a CSA together. And in this model, you might still be getting that payment up front, or not, sort of depending how you want to do it. But that kind of multi-farm partnership can be really interesting. There is a guide to multi-farm CSAs through the New Entry Sustainable Farming Project. I would also say that in addition, so a multi-farm partnership is like we're presenting that as partnership. There are many other CSAs that farms that do CSA that just buy in some of their product. And they might do that because of some of those same efficiency issues, right? That they, like, a nearby farm grows great organic green beans and has a green bean picker, and it's just like so much simpler and more cost effective to buy in those green beans than to grow green beans and harvest them as the main farm. Or maybe there is a climate issue or a pest or disease issue, and you say, like, we're not growing garlic for 4 years because we've had problems with bloat nematode, and so we're going to buy in garlic from another farm. That happens a lot. Grown By makes that very easy to share with your customers, like what product is from another farm. But I just encourage everyone to think, like, if you're doing that, to be really as transparent as you can be about what you're buying in and why even you're buying it in. So, like, if your customers say, we want to have sweet corn, and you say, I do not want to try to grow organic sweet corn, but somebody down the road has kind of been able to do that well, and I'll be able to offer it to my members. And so that is just a kind of thing to keep in mind that we see a lot in CSA here in the Northeast and probably across the country. Member-run CSAs, I think that's a little bit fringe, but I love it so much I can't not mention it. So in this style of CSA, members can do a lot of the harvesting and sometimes much of the labor. Some farms might call that a U-pick CSA. That obviously would work best for a farm that where the farm is the pickup location, right? You wouldn't be able to do it otherwise. But it is a very interesting way to, have a very different style of CSA. So a full diet is another one. I think if it hasn't occurred to you to have a full diet CSA, you probably won't hear me say this and then be like, oh yeah, that's going to be great for me. But this is a farm that is providing all of the general needs of a diet. So that model is usually vegetables, fruit, dairy, eggs, meat, grains. It's, I think, super cool. And it means that a customer is getting like almost all of their food from one farm or maybe one collection of farms. It's also a huge amount of infrastructure and labor and just knowledge, right? I think even those of us who feel like we are pretty good at growing vegetables, the idea of then also like raising dairy cows is a big, it could feel like a big leap. So that is a model that we see, a model that I think is really interesting. I think a model that should be shared around and talked about. And then I put specialty on here. I think this would be considered a production strategy, but these are shares that go beyond the usual vegetables. So that could be a meat share, that could be a dairy share, something like artisanal goods. I saw Rye say that they were setting up a medicinal herb CSA, or no, a medicinal tea CSA. And I think that kind of like focus on some of the strategies of CSA, but in a more specialty market is really cool. And those are ways to be growing and selling, but sort of be doing the kind of growing that you're most interested in, and to be doing something that sort of is an interesting specialty addition to what's available in your region. One of the other things I would maybe group with specialty is just farms who are growing and selling for a really specific community. And the idea, the farmer who comes to mind most in this is Christina Chan from Choi Division. She's a New York farmer who is growing Asian vegetables for Asian American consumers. So all her members are mostly Asian American, and those are the kinds of crops she's really focused on growing. And that totally sets her apart from other folks, and it changes the way she markets and the kind of relationship I think she has with her consumers, and is quite interesting. And I think, lots of farms incorporate their customers' preferences into their ongoing crop plan. That's highly recommended. Christina's is like a little bit above and beyond, I think, because she's growing crops that customers couldn't necessarily get easily from other CSAs. And then there are two other production strategies that I'll mention. So one is year-round growing, where there are pickups all year long. We might see those as separate shares that might be sold all season long, not necessarily a 52-week share, although we also see 52-week shares. And that if you break it into clumps, you can kind of manage inventory a little bit better. So you might sell more mid-season shares when you have a lot more food coming out of the farm, and maybe smaller shares in the winter when you have a little less. But that's just a growing or production strategy that some people are using. And then winter shares. So here again in the Northeast, we have lots of farms who also offer winter shares full of storage vegetables or high tunnel grown greens, apples, cider, that kind of thing. And there are some farms there are a couple of farms who have developed that are only winter share farms. And there are some who kind of offer winter shares outside of their regular CSA distributions to other farmers who might not have like strong winter storage or might not want to offer winter shares. That winter shares are great. I think they keep customers really engaged with the farm over the season. They also require that you have growing infrastructure for winter growing. And I always love to mention, as someone who's done a decent amount of winter growing, like winter washing and packing infrastructure, which just, when you don't have it, can make your life feel a little cold and unpleasant. So thinking about like at what point in the scope of your farm you're interested in implementing winter shares like that. And seasonality of all of these things. We have a farm on the platform that's based in New Orleans, on Grown By, that's based in New Orleans, River Queen Greens. They have a production strategy of sort of a fall and winter share and then a smaller spring share, and they take the summer off because that's what works in their climate and their growing region. In some parts of the country, year-round growing is going to be a lot easier. So those are all things to kind of weigh and think about your production strategies. Next slide, Danny. Did anyone want to ask a question about that last one before I move on? Tracy asked, we only have eggs available this year due to weather. Next year you have eggs and meat. Would that make us a specialty farm? I don't know that that's it. Like, first of all, there's not like a label for specialty farms, right? So it might be that most people try to market themselves as somehow special because that's how you would be excited to get customers. But I think that I don't know that it makes you like, maybe that's specialty. I think it's just, I was pulling aside that idea to sort of focus on the fact that there could be lots of different ways that one builds a share. You don't necessarily have to focus on vegetables. Hopefully that helps that question. Hopefully that answers that a little bit. And then on to distribution strategies. So this is an area where there are lots of different ways to distribute your produce. We have a workshop on choosing a distribution location, but we also have one on building and thinking out your CSA share, in which we talk about like thinking about boxing or not boxing. But here, this first sort of column here is pre-boxed or market style. And those kind of get presented as two different models or two different sort of distribution strategies. So in a market style CSA, you would have like bins of produce, like a tote of produce, and that are all laid out for the members to select from and fill their own bags. So perhaps your share is like beets and Swiss chard and thyme and butternut squash and I don't know, fennel. And so you have a bin of fennel, a bin of squash, a bin of Swiss chard, a bin of beets, and members can go through and choose their own. And one of the perks of that is that when you've made your beet bunches, maybe some beets are really big and some beets were smaller, and the customer can kind of have some level of choice in the actual bunch that they get. It also makes it possible to have like a swap box or a place there where a customer who doesn't like beets but is really excited about Swiss chard can put in their beets and take an excess bunch of Swiss chard to kind of, I wouldn't call it customizable, but can kind of swap out things that they want. That is a thing we see often at market style CSA distributions. This is also just like way less labor because you're not boxing shares. One upside is way less labor. Other upside is a little bit of customer feeling like they picked the butternut that they like best. And one of the other upsides is that you can use reusable totes. So you're not paying for boxes. You're not asking for members to bring these boxes back that we're not, that have been at your house for a week or whatever. And one of the downsides of the market style CSA is if you're doing it on farm, it's pretty straightforward. If you're doing it at an off-farm distribution location, you do have to have some sort of box storage or box management. because maybe you'll store all the bins that you had, these reusable totes, maybe you'll store those at that distribution location and get them the next week. Or maybe if there's the farmer or the farm staff is there for the whole distribution, they'll just take them home at the end of the night, but it does involve some moving around of totes. In a pre-boxed share, all of the items for that week are pre-boxed and the customer takes their box home. So maybe my box, this happens in my winter share, at the winter share that I purchased for my house. So maybe I go to a distribution location and there's just 40 boxes and I take one, I put it in my car and go home. Sometimes also, especially if the boxes are customized, the box would say Cara flavor on it, and then I would know that one was mine. The customer might be encouraged to return the boxes or not, sort of depending on the cost of the boxes and what you've made them like. And some people use, like I would have a pre-boxed share, but it's in like insulated bags, insulated reusable tote bags or something. So just because we're saying pre-boxed doesn't mean it actually has to be a physical box. One of the upsides to this, right, is that you can do a customizable share. You can put somebody's fruit share in their box, so they've chosen add-on shares like eggs or fruit or mushrooms, and you can pack that all in the same box so that you don't have to worry about them missing something that they were supposed to pick up and they missed. It doesn't have the same you can kind of control things a little bit as a farmer. Sometimes in the market style version that we just talked about, the farm will send a couple extra of things. So if it's a small CSA, maybe they just send one extra bunch of beets in case something happens and a customer takes something erroneously. But in the pre-boxed version, you don't have to have a margin of error. You can just pack exactly what you need. But it takes a lot of time to pack boxes every week. I think farms who have been through COVID know that, right? Because they probably moved to that in that moment. I think some farms really develop a pretty fast and efficient way of doing that, but it does take a lot of thinking to make that process go quickly instead of sort of fishbowling into like an all-day thing where we just pack boxes for hours. Some of the other distribution strategies could be how frequently you distribute. So weekly, bi-weekly, monthly. We see distributions on all of those schedules. Here at Grown By, we have the joy of getting to see all these different ways that people build their CSAs. Especially something like monthly can be really helpful for potentially like a meat share or something that's frozen or something that has a much longer shelf life. So that the farm just has fewer distributions, less transportation, less labor in packing, and is able to kind of be on a schedule that works for them, but still allows the consumer to, take that product home and put it in their freezer and be able to eat it as they want between now and next month. Some farms, so that bi-weekly share, we see lots of farms offer bi-weekly shares for their CSAs. Some farms are very excited. This is like nitty-gritty details, but that's what I'm diving into here, I guess. Some farms are very excited in their bi-weekly shares to even them out, right? So if they have 150 shares, 100 of them are weekly, and then 50 of them are bi-weekly, with 25 of them being like A week and 25 of them being B weeks. So that way the farm knows, like, I just deliver 125 shares a week. Or some farms are excited to have some weeks that are a little heavier than others. So in that case, they would maybe have all of their bi-weeklies pick up on an A week and then no bi-weeklies on a B week. I think that's a thing to ask yourself as if you are preparing to do bi-weekly shares. That's a question to kind of ask yourself. And then multiple share sizes. The other thing to say about bi-weeklies that's in these, like in the little words here, is that some farms, like especially in a CSA in New York City setting, are like, look, we don't want to juggle bi-weekly shares. So just find somebody who's your partner And that person can pick up on some weeks and you can pick up some other weeks, and we'll take payment from each of you individually, but you'll share the share. Or you can just, like, one person pays and the other person Venmos them. So it's that is another way to kind of encourage biweekly shares for families who are like, oh man, a regular vegetable share is too much for me to eat. But you still want to accommodate them, but biweekly shares can be just a little bit more labor for the farm to kind of manage. Christina from Troy Division mentioned that she does that. She's like encourages people to find a partner, and would love to see like a really great romance or friendship come out of it, but has not yet. And I think it would be a great story to share. We also see multiple share sizes. So some farms might just offer one share. That's like a very traditional thing, one share. But increasingly, we are seeing multiple share sizes, maybe small and large, which is just helpful for different size families, different people who have different, who eat out at different rates, people who cook at different rates, people who are just more or less comfortable with vegetables. So that multiple share sizes is a thing to consider. It does, again, it's like a little bit more work from a farmer perspective to manage those shares, but can be a really great way to include more people in your CSA. There are also free choice CSAs. River Queen Greens in New Orleans that I mentioned earlier is a great example of this. In this style, all of the food is out on display, and customers can either choose the items that they want. Like maybe you say, all this is available, take any 8 items from this table. And in some models, it's free choice, like you can take as much as you want. And interestingly, in those models where it's free choice, kind of take as much as you want, farmers often respond that they see families take less food than they would have given them in a share. So that's an interesting anecdote. So that, again, that method really works best at a on-farm distribution and is harder to implement on any kind of off-site distribution location. I think so. That makes sense. And then flexible week CSAs. So we have a farm or two like this on Grown By. In this model, customers might just choose the weeks that they want to pick up. So this I think can work really well in a university town or in a place with lots of seasonal residences. So maybe there's some people there in the summer and some people there in the winter, and folks can say like, oh, I'll buy a share between, Labor Day and Christmas, but I won't buy anything during the summer. So that is also a model that we have seen, and that we support at Grown By quite well. And there are also, to just add on to distribution strategies a little bit, like on Grown By, we support and encourage the use of offering a few vacation weeks to customers. That's not particularly traditional in like a very old school traditional sense of CSA, but it does give some flexibility for customers to like feel like they're not wasting the food that they have. Ryan, do you have a question? Okay, it's nice to see your face though. Danny, will you go to the next slide? Does anybody else have a question? Sorry, I should have asked before we move on from distribution strategies. Okay. You guys are a real chatty bunch. Okay, so site strategies. We talked a little bit about on-farm pickup. In this slide, these kind of show like nesting into each other. So on-farm pickup is one of the easiest site strategies, right? If you live in a place where you can get customers to just come buy from you, pick up on-farm, and you can sell enough shares that way, that is excellent. You don't have to have a giant, plan for trucking. You don't have to, that's just like a lot of money saved, and hassle and labor saved. Then, once you feel like you've maxed out your on-farm pickup or whatever. You can have off-farm drop-off sites. So those might be distribution locations at nonprofits or community centers, for-profit businesses. We see them in bars. We see them in bakeries or any kind of for-profit business. We also see pickups at private homes. It's also not uncommon for me to see, like I saw a farm this week saying, like, if you can get 15 people who will pick up at your home, like we'll deliver 15 boxes to your house. So I think that's another, we see private homes as a drop-off location. I think the pros and cons of that, of course. Parks, other locations like that. You may also have an off-farm site that is your own farmer's market stand. So if that's allowed with the rules of your farmer's market, you might have, some shares that are ready at your farmer's market, or if you have a spend down CSA, like the farmer's market would be your location. And we have a workplace CSA in here, which is sort of a part of the off-farm drop-off site. There are some workplaces who really would love to see CSA distributions at their workplace, so they kind of might incentivize it. Management might incentivize it with for employees. The staff might help with setup and breakdown, that kind of thing. There are some very large workplace CSAs in the country. It is a little complicated then if somebody is no longer working at that location, their membership would just need to end. So, considering that. There was a big push a while back to have like more workplace CSAs. I think post-COVID, it might be that fewer people have like a standard workplace that they go to every day or reliably every day. So that's something to keep in mind. Also, delivery. Home delivery can be really challenging. It's just like a lot of extra time and effort and resources. But we do definitely see CSAs offering home delivery. If Grown by supports that as well, you can kind of enter in your zip codes that you provide to which you provide home delivery, and then if customers are in those zip codes, they can sign up for delivery on a specific route, and you can charge a delivery fee in Grown by to match that by the location. So if that's something you're excited about. And then shipping is probably not a great choice with produce or with dairy, but in some cases can work well for something like meat or grains. This makes me think of the Rancho Gordo Beans Club. Certainly medicinal herbs or body products that a farm might create. You could have, we may have a farm on Grown by that does a goat's milk soap CSA. Or maybe they don't market it as a CSA, but like soap is a product that you use hopefully many times a week, or every day even. And so like you could set that up to be a CSA that someone received and it was shipped using shipping. So we also have a workshop on choosing distribution locations, and that's like kind of thinking about what you need as an off-farm delivery site to make it effective and smooth for you as a farm and for marketing. So does anybody have questions about site strategy? So there's add-on shares and a la carte items, what to think about when building a CSA share, financial accessibility, communication, distribution locations. Anyway, you can read. But that's kind of what we've scoped out that kind of corresponds with the information in that guidebook.